The hall was bright with lights that felt too strong for the boy's eyes. The sound of people talking, laughing, and moving around echoed everywhere. It was the biggest crowd he had ever seen in his life. He stood backstage, holding his hands tightly together because they wouldn't stop shaking. He could hear the host calling out the next contestant, and he knew it was his turn. His heart beat so loud it felt like everyone around him could hear it. He took one slow breath, then another, trying to calm himself, but nothing helped. He felt small, almost invisible, yet everyone's eyes would soon be on him. When he stepped out, the whole stage suddenly felt too big, too empty. His shoes were old, one lace broken, and the wooden floor showed his reflection. His clothes were simple, worn out, and clearly different from what the other contestants were wearing. They had clean suits, shiny shoes, and neat hair. But he only had the best clothes his mother could find from the donation box. Still, he walked forward slowly, his steps careful. Like each one carried a heavy weight. Some audience members noticed his appearance immediately, and soft laughter started from different corners of the hall. He tried not to look up, but he could feel their eyes on him. Judging him, the laughter wasn't loud, but it cut deep. He had heard people laugh at him many times before, at school, on the streets, even in markets where he helped his mother carry heavy bags. But this laughter hurt more because he was standing alone, far away from anyone who could protect him. He focused on the piano at the center of the stage, the only thing that felt familiar. He had dreamed of touching a real piano for years, but now that it was in front of him, he felt like he didn't deserve it. The judges sat behind a long table, watching his every move. One judge raised an eyebrow as soon as he saw the boy. Another whispered something to her partner while writing something on her paper. Their faces looked bored, unimpressed, as if they had already decided what his performance would be like before he even touched the keys. He felt his stomach twist when he saw their expressions. He knew they didn't expect anything good from him. He knew they thought he was wasting their time. But he still forced himself to keep walking. When he finally reached the piano bench, he sat down very slowly, afraid he might break something. His hands hovered over the keys, but they trembled so much he had to hide them by placing them on his lap for a few seconds. The whispers from the audience grew louder, some people making jokes about how long he was taking, others saying he didn't look like he belonged on such a stage. A teenager in the front row laughed openly and pointed at him, calling him the charity case. His cheeks burned, and he wished he could disappear, but running away would only prove them right. He glanced once toward the back row, hoping to see his mother. She had promised she would try to make it after finishing her shift, but he couldn't spot her anywhere. Maybe she was stuck in traffic, maybe she couldn't get a seat, or maybe she hadn't been able to come at all. The thought made him feel even more alone. He swallowed hard and blinked back the tears forming in his eyes. He couldn't cry here, not in front of all these people. Not in front of people who thought he was a joke. He had to be strong, even if he felt weak inside. He looked at the judge who would give the signal to start. The judge didn't smile, didn't encourage him. He simply nodded, a cold, quick nod that meant, go ahead and get it over with. The boy felt a painful twist in his chest, but he straightened his back. He had not come this far to fail. He had practiced every night on a broken keyboard someone had thrown away. He had memorized every note by listening to street musicians. He had dreamed of this moment for years, and he could not let fear destroy it. He took a deep breath, placed his trembling fingers on the piano keys, and closed his eyes. He tried to block out the laughter, the whispers, the doubtful looks. He tried to remember the nights he practiced under dim light, the songs he played when he felt sad or lonely, the moments when music made him feel alive. Slowly, his breathing steadied. For the first time since stepping on stage, he wasn't thinking about what people thought of him. He was thinking only about the piano, the one thing that had always felt like home. The hall grew strangely quiet. People stopped moving, stopped whispering, waiting to hear what he would do. The boy didn't look up, didn't speak. He let the silence wrap around him. And then, gently, he pressed the first key. He sat on the piano bench like someone touching something precious for the first time. He didn't move right away, he just breathed slowly, trying to keep his hands from shaking. Behind him, a few people still chuckled, thinking the show would soon turn into another funny moment they could laugh about later. They didn't know the truth hidden inside the boy's heart. They didn't know his whole life had led to this exact second. Every fear he carried, every pain he hid, every dream he protected like a tiny flame in a storm, all of it sat quietly beside him on that stage. The boy had grown up in a small room with peeling paint, old furniture, and a mother who worked too hard for too little money. His father had died when he was very young, leaving behind nothing but memories and a few things that didn't work anymore. One of those things was an old broken keyboard. Half of the keys didn't play, and the ones that worked sounded thin and shaky. But to the boy, it was a treasure. He used to sit on the floor for hours pressing the keys, dreaming of what real music must feel like. He would close his eyes and imagine a piano big enough to fill a whole room with sound, while other kids played outside. He spent his evenings learning melodies by listening to songs on his mother's tiny phone. He would replay small clips again and again until he understood the pattern of notes. He never had a teacher, never had lessons, never had books of music. Everything he knew came from listening, feeling, and repeating. His mother once asked him why he loved music more than anything, and he smiled shyly, telling her that when he played, he didn't feel poor anymore. He didn't feel small. He didn't feel unwanted. The world felt bigger when he played, and for once, it welcomed him. But people outside their home rarely understood him. At school, the richer children made fun of him, calling him the trash pianist because he practiced on a broken keyboard someone had thrown away. Teachers never noticed his talent. They were too busy trying to control the noisy classroom to see the quiet boy in the back, who hummed songs he didn't even know the names of. Some nights he cried into his pillow because he felt like no one saw him. No one believed he could be something more. But every time he felt like giving up, he remembered his mother coming home late, tired but still smiling at him with pride, telling him that he had something special inside. That memory sat with him now on the stage, giving him a tiny bit of strength. He opened his eyes and saw his fingers resting on the piano keys. This piano wasn't broken. It wasn't missing sounds, it was perfect. And he had waited his entire life to play something perfect. He gently pressed down on a key, not enough to make a sound, but enough to feel its smoothness. He felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he didn't have backstage. He felt like this piano was waiting for him, like it had been waiting for years to hear his story. But the whispers continued. Someone in the audience said loudly that he didn't even know what he was doing. Another complained that they wanted to see the next contestant. Not this poor boy drama. The boy closed his eyes again, not because he was scared this time, but because he didn't want their words to enter his heart. He had worked too hard to let a few voices break him. He breathed in slowly, letting the memory of his mother's voice guide him. She always told him, "Play like you're talking to God, not like you're talking to people." That line stayed in his mind like a lighthouse in a dark sea. He remembered the nights when the power went out and he practiced by candlelight, tapping rhythms on the table when the keyboard wouldn't turn on. He remembered the times he played quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. He remembered how his mother would sit on the bed listening with closed eyes, smiling even when the sounds were broken and uneven. She made him believe his music mattered even when the world told him it didn't. That belief was the only thing stronger than fear inside him. He opened his eyes, looked at the keys, and this time he didn't see a crowd. He didn't see judges. He didn't see the bright lights. He saw a small boy in a tiny room, practicing alone, trying his best, dreaming of a moment like this. And he realized something important. He wasn't playing for the audience. He wasn't playing for the judges. He wasn't even playing for the competition. He was playing for that little boy inside him who never stopped hoping. Slowly, he lifted his hands, and with a calmness that surprised even him, he placed his fingers on the first notes of the song he had practiced 1,000 times. Tears almost filled his eyes, not from sadness, but from knowing how far he had come. The laughter in the hall faded into a distant blur. His fear loosened its grip on him. For the first time since walking onto the stage, he didn't feel alone, and then, with a soft breath, he prepared to play the note that would change everything. He waited for the judge's signal. His fingers frozen above the keys like they were afraid to move. The hall felt tense, almost heavy, as if everyone was waiting for something embarrassing to happen. The judge finally lifted his hand and gave a small nod. It wasn't a warm gesture, not encouraging, just a quick motion to begin. The boy swallowed hard, but before he could touch the piano, someone in the second row whispered loudly that this would be funny, and a small wave of laughter spread across the room again. He felt the sound hit him like tiny stones. Painful even though they were small, he kept his eyes on the piano, but his ears couldn't stop hearing the comments. A woman in the back joked that she had seen better-dressed kids begging on the street. A man near the front shook his head and said the show must be desperate to let anyone perform now. Each voice added weight to the fear already inside him. His shoulders tensed, and for a moment he thought he might stand up and run away. He imagined stepping off the stage, walking out of the hall, and disappearing into the night where no one could laugh at him. But then he remembered his mother's voice telling him that courage wasn't loud. It was quiet and steady. He pressed one key lightly, but instead of playing, he lifted his hand again. His heart was beating so fast that it felt impossible to think clearly. His mind went to school days when his classmates mocked him for humming songs during lunch break. One kid once snatched his broken keyboard and threw it across the classroom. Everyone laughed, and the teacher didn't even ask why he looked so hurt. He learned early that people could be cruel without even trying. And the same cruelty was now floating in the hall, reaching him from every direction. A teenager in the front row leaned back in his seat and said loudly, "He doesn't even look like he knows what a piano is." More laughter followed. Louder this time, the boy felt something cold rise through his chest. He wasn't angry. Anger took too much energy. He just felt small, like he shrunk with every laugh. He wondered if people would ever understand how hard he had tried to stand on that stage. How many nights he had gone to bed hungry, only to wake up early to practice. How many dreams he had carried alone because no one else believed in them. Still, he didn't lift his head. He didn't want to see their faces. He didn't want to see the judges' bored expressions. He stared only at the keys, the only place where he didn't feel judged. He tried to keep his breathing steady, inhale, exhale, slowly, like his mother had taught him when he cried at night. He focused on that rhythm, hoping it would calm him. But the laughter continued, one rude comment after another. As if the whole was determined to crush whatever courage he had left. He felt tears burn the corners of his eyes. He blinked fast to stop them. He could not cry here. Not in front of all these strangers. He had learned to hide his tears since he was very young. His mother always said crying wasn't weakness. But he had discovered that the world didn't see it that way. If he cried now, they wouldn't see a boy fighting his fear. They would see someone to laugh at even more, so he forced the tears back. Breathing deeply, even though his chest hurt, the judge cleared his throat. Annoyed that the performance hadn't started yet, he tapped his pen on the table louder than necessary. The boy heard the sharp sound and knew he had no more time. He had to play, even if his hands felt like they weren't part of his body anymore. He pressed his fingers on the keys and let them rest there. The laughter slowly faded as people grew curious. wondering if he would finally start. He still didn't look up. He didn't trust his expression. He might break if he saw one more mocking face. Just when he thought he might fail, he remembered something important. He remembered the night his mother found him crying over the broken keyboard, worrying he would never be good enough. She had knelt beside him, wiped his tears, and whispered, "Don't let the world decide who you are. Play because it makes you alive." Those words came back now, calm and warm, and they wrapped around his heart like a blanket. He inhaled slowly, feeling the warmth spread through him. His fear didn't disappear, but it softened. He wasn't alone on the stage anymore. Not in his mind. He had his mother's voice, his childhood dreams, and all the nights he practiced in silence. The audience didn't know his pain. They didn't know his story. They only saw a poor boy. But the piano knew him better. The piano knew every hope he ever poured into those broken keys at home. He took one last breath, closed his eyes tight, and finally pressed the first real note. A soft sound filled the hall, gentle but strong, and in that moment, without lifting his head, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't courage or confidence. It was something deeper, the belief that this was his moment, and he would not let anyone steal it from him. When the first note escaped the piano, it rang through the hall in a way no one expected. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it carried a kind of softness that stopped the air from moving. The sound floated like a warm breath in a cold room, gentle yet full of something deep and honest. People who had been laughing suddenly found themselves turning quiet. The boy didn't lift his head. His eyes stayed closed, trusting the piano more than himself, trusting the music more than the moment. His fingers, though shaky just seconds ago, now felt like they belonged there on those keys. The hall grew still, the kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. A woman in the fifth row stopped whispering mid-sentence, her mouth still open, but her voice gone. A man who had mocked the boy earlier leaned forward, squinting, unsure if his ears had tricked him. Even the judge who had tapped his pen impatiently paused and lowered his hand. The sound coming from the piano wasn't the sound of a beginner or a nervous child. It was the sound of someone who lived inside music. Someone who didn't speak the world's language but spoke a language all his own. The boy pressed the second note, then the third, and something magical began to fill the room. It wasn't magic from fairy tales. It was real magic, the kind that happens when pain meets talent and talent meets heart. The notes were not perfect, but they were alive. Each one carried a part of him, a piece of his story, a bit of his truth. You could hear the loneliness, the hunger, the sleepless nights, the hope, the tiny victories he kept to himself, and the dreams he held close even when the world tried to crush them. Someone in the back row gasped softly. Another person lowered their phone. Forgetting for a moment about recording the show, the judges exchanged startled looks. The boy was unaware of all this. He had escaped into the music, into the place where no one laughed at him, no one pointed fingers, no one judged his clothes or his broken shoes. In the world inside the music, he was not poor, not small, not unwanted. He was simply a boy who loved the piano with every piece of his heart. His fingers began moving faster, sliding across the keys with the confidence of someone who had practiced in silence for years. The audience leaned in without realizing it. They weren't just listening, they were feeling. The first few notes had pulled them in gently, but now the music wrapped around them, almost forcing them to sit still and hear the story he couldn't speak with words. The hall felt different now, less like a stage and more like a confession room where every sound mattered. The teenager who had laughed loudly earlier slowly lowered his smirk. His eyes narrowed in surprise, not because the boy was good, but because he was extraordinary. The boy's small frame, his simple clothes, his nervous posture, none of it matched the power that flowed from his fingertips. A woman wiped her eyes without understanding why she felt emotional, even though she didn't know the boy at all. But his music touched something inside her, something soft and fragile that she didn't show often. The judges were no different. The strict judge on the right leaned back in his chair, blinking fast as if trying to understand how such a sound could come from a child who moments ago looked like he didn't even belong there. The female judge covered her mouth slightly, hiding her shock. She had seen hundreds of contestants, heard hundreds of performances, but something about this boy's music felt different. It wasn't polished or trained, but it was pure, painfully pure. And purity is something you cannot teach, it can only be born. The boy's posture changed as he played. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing steadied. His hands seemed to forget fear. They moved like they had waited forever to be free. Each stroke of the keys released something from inside him: doubt, sadness, memories too heavy for a child his age. But along with that pain came beauty. His music didn't just speak of struggle. It spoke of strength, of endurance, of a heart that refused to stop dreaming even when life tried to break it again and again. The hall was silent except for the piano. It wasn't the silence of boredom anymore. It was the silence of people caught by something bigger than themselves. They couldn't take their eyes off the boy, their shame mixed with awe, because they realized they had laughed at someone far stronger than they had imagined. They had judged him based on his appearance, but his music revealed the truth. He was extraordinary, far beyond their expectations, and the boy, still lost in the world inside those notes, had no idea that for the first time in his life, a whole room full of strangers had stopped to truly see him. The more he played, the deeper the music reached into the hearts of everyone in the hall. His fingers moved softly at first, then stronger, then gentle again, as if he were telling a story that didn't belong to words. People didn't just hear the music, they felt it. It flowed through the air like a memory people had forgotten they carried. It touched every listener differently, but deeply. The boy didn't know this. He was somewhere inside his own world, a world built by hardship, but held together by hope. Every note carried a picture of his life. If the audience had been able to look inside the sound, they would have seen the nights he sat alone on the floor practicing with a broken keyboard. They would have seen his mother coming home tired, but stopping to smile when she heard him play. They would have seen the moments when he felt so lonely that he used music to keep himself from breaking. The boy wasn't performing a rehearsed song. He was sharing pieces of his soul, and everyone in the hall was silently receiving them. A man in the front row who had laughed earlier now leaned forward without blinking. He wasn't smiling. His face had softened in surprise. It was as if he realized how wrong he had been. A teenage girl near the middle wiped her eyes, even though she wasn't sure why she felt emotional. She didn't know the boy, yet she felt connected to him through the music. Some people had never seen poverty, never known hunger, never felt unloved, but the music made them feel something close to it. Something real, something heavy yet beautiful. The judges were completely still. The judge who had seemed the strictest rested his chin on his hand, listening so carefully that he didn't blink for several seconds. The female judge's eyes were glossy. She kept glancing between the boy's shaking hands and the calm expression on his face, wondering how someone so young could carry such emotion. The third judge, who had been writing notes earlier, stopped writing and simply listened. His pen rested on his paper. Forgotten, it was rare, almost impossible, for a contestant to make all the judges fall silent at the same time. The boy shifted into the middle section of the piece, letting his fingers glide through a melody he had created himself long ago when he felt like the world was too cruel. He had never shown it to anyone, not even his mother. He played it when he wanted to cry, but didn't want anyone to hear. It was a secret melody made from invisible wounds. The moment that melody filled the room, the hall felt heavier, like a soft sadness had wrapped around every heart. But it wasn't the kind of sadness that hurts. It was the kind of sadness that reminds people they are human. For a brief second, he opened his eyes and saw the hall glowing under the lights. But he didn't see the people clearly. They were just shadows around the piano. He didn't notice that no one was laughing anymore. He didn't see that many faces were softened with emotion. He didn't hear the quiet sniffles or the held breaths. He only saw the piano in front of him and felt the weight of his own past rising and falling with every note. His fingers reached the most emotional part of the melody, the part he used to play on nights when he felt like giving up on everything. The sound carried a sense of longing, a quiet cry for someone to notice him, someone to understand him, someone to tell him he mattered. That feeling entered the audience without warning. People who had come expecting entertainment suddenly found themselves remembering their own lonely moments, their own childhood fears, their own hidden pain. Music has a way of opening doors inside people that they didn't know were locked. A woman in the audience covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hide the tears rolling down her cheeks. She didn't know the boy's story, but she felt it. A man who had come with his children placed his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder, without realizing why. Even the teenager who had mocked him earlier lowered his head, ashamed of what he had said. He kept his eyes on the floor, not because he was bored, but because he suddenly felt small in front of the music. The judges were touched in their own ways. The female judge blinked several times, trying to keep her tears from falling on the judging sheet. She whispered something to the judge beside her, but he didn't look at her. He was lost in the melody. The strict judge swallowed hard, struggling to maintain his professional expression. But the softness in his eyes betrayed him. It had been a long time since a contestant made him feel anything. But this boy's music reminded him of why he had loved the piano when he was young. Before life grew busy and heavy, the boy continued to play, unaware that he was peeling back layers of emotion in every listener, unaware that the hall was experiencing something rare, music that didn't just entertain, but healed. He played because he had nothing else. Music was his friend, his voice, his comfort. And now it had become the bridge between his heart and the hearts of hundreds of strangers. And slowly, note by note, the boy who had walked onto the stage with fear began to transform. The audience didn't just listen to him anymore. They felt him, they understood him, they finally saw him, not as a poor kid, but as someone extraordinary. And his story through music was still far from finished. As the boy reached the final section of his performance, the atmosphere in the hall had completely changed. A place that once echoed with laughter and whispers now breathed in total silence. The audience sat frozen, not because they were forced, but because the music refused to let them move. It held them gently but firmly. The way a strong memory holds the heart. Even the lights above the stage seemed softer, as if they too didn't want to disturb him. The melody shifted from sadness into something stronger, something like hope rising through heavy clouds. His fingers pressed the keys with more confidence now. No tremble, no hesitation. His hands seemed to know the path even before his mind gave direction. It was like he wasn't just playing, he was releasing something that had been locked inside him for years. The hall listened, carrying the weight of every single sound as if it were a secret being entrusted to them alone. People began to experience something rare, goosebumps rising with the music. Children who usually got bored quickly now sat still, eyes wide. Adults who came expecting entertainment now found themselves witnessing something far more meaningful. Something real, something pure. A father leaned down and whispered to his son to pay attention. Not because the boy was performing well, but because moments like this didn't happen often. The son nodded without taking his eyes off the stage. The judges were no different. One of them sat with his hands clasped together, elbows on the table, staring at the boy with disbelief. He had judged competitions for years, seen trained prodigies, seen star performers, but this felt different. This wasn't skill alone, this was life, this was emotion, this was truth poured into notes. The female judge wiped the corner of her eyes and whispered, "Where did he come from?" Her voice cracked softly. She didn't expect to feel so much from a child who looked like he didn't even belong on the stage moments ago. The boy reached a part of the melody that rose like a small flame turning into a warm fire. It filled the hall with a sense of strength. People straightened in their seats, feeling something lift inside them. A woman touched her chest because she felt a sudden warmth spread there. She didn't know whether it was the sound or the story she imagined behind it, but she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe she remembered a dream she once had. Maybe she remembered a moment she had lost. Music made people remember things they forgot they cared about. As for the boy, he had no idea what he was doing to the audience. He wasn't thinking of them at all. He wasn't thinking of the judges, or the hall, or the competition. His mind had gone somewhere else, somewhere familiar. He saw himself sitting on the old floor of his small house, practicing on the broken keyboard. He saw his mother standing quietly behind him, exhausted after work, but smiling anyway. He saw himself wishing for a chance like this, wishing to be heard, wishing to matter. And now, here he was, playing his truth for the first time on a real piano. But the boy didn't know he was doing more than that. He was changing people without realizing it. A man in the front row, who earlier mocked him, now felt his face burn with shame. He lowered his eyes, unable to look at the stage. The boy he had laughed at was far stronger than he ever imagined. A teenage girl wiped her tears quickly, trying not to let her friends see. She didn't understand why the music made her feel like hugging someone, maybe hugging herself. Maybe she didn't know she needed comfort until the music gave it to her. Even the technical crew backstage stood quietly. Some of them forgot to monitor the sound levels because they were too lost in the performance. One of the staff members whispered, "This kid is something else." Another nodded silently, his eyes soft with surprise. They weren't trained to judge music, but they knew when something felt important. And this felt important. It felt like watching a hidden seed break the soil and suddenly bloom right in front of them. The boy's fingers danced through the final rising notes. His posture had changed without him knowing. He was no longer curled in fear. He sat tall now, back straight, shoulders steady. The piano had given him strength, given him voice, given him wings he didn't know he had. His face wasn't nervous anymore. It was calm, peaceful, almost glowing under the stage lights. It was the face of someone who finally felt seen, even if he didn't realize that every eye in the hall was watching him with respect, not judgment. A few seconds before the ending, the hall was holding its breath. People leaned forward unconsciously, waiting for something they didn't fully understand. The music grew softer, softer still, as if the boy was whispering his final secret, and every person leaned in closer, afraid to miss even one tiny sound. And then he played the last note. A gentle, delicate touch that floated in the air long after his hand lifted from the key. The note hung there, trembling slightly, as if refusing to fade away too quickly. The entire hall stayed frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to break the fragile magic covering the room. For the first time in his life, the boy had silenced the world, not with fear, but with beauty. For a long moment, no one moved. The final note hung in the air like a tiny star refusing to fade. It shimmered in the silence, resting gently on every heart in the hall. The boy kept his hand above the keys, frozen in place, afraid that if he moved too quickly, the fragile moment would break. He slowly opened his eyes, and for the first time, he noticed the silence around him, a heavy, powerful silence, not the silence of boredom or judgment, but the silence of awe. He lifted his hand off the piano key, and it felt as if the whole room exhaled at once. People blinked, like waking from a dream they didn't want to leave. The boy looked around nervously, expecting disappointment, expecting someone to laugh again, expecting someone to call him lucky or call his music accidental. But instead, he found hundreds of faces staring at him with wide eyes, soft expressions, and something he had never received from strangers: respect. He didn't understand it at first. His brain was still filled with the music he had played, and the world around him felt distant, almost blurred. The lights above seemed softer. The hall felt warmer. He didn't hear laughter. Didn't hear whispers. Didn't hear jokes. For the first time since stepping onto the stage, all he heard was quiet. A quiet so full that it felt like a hug around his heart. Then, slowly, someone stood up. It was a woman in the middle row, her eyes watery, her hands trembling slightly as she clapped once. Just once, the sound echoed, clear and gentle. Another person stood up behind her and clapped too, and then a third and a fourth. And within seconds the entire hall stood to their feet. Applause erupting like a wave crashing toward the stage. The noise was loud, but it wasn't harsh. It was warm, powerful, and full of gratitude. The boy's heart jumped. He stared at the crowd, confused. He didn't understand what was happening. He had only seen standing ovations in videos on his mother's old phone. And those were always for famous people, special people, talented people. He never imagined strangers would stand up for him. Especially strangers who had laughed at him just minutes before. Some people clapped with both hands raised, as if praising something divine. Some clapped slowly, deeply moved. Some wiped tears as they clapped. One man who had mocked him earlier now clapped with his head lowered in shame, wishing he could take back every cruel word. The teenage girl in the middle row had tears sliding down her face. She didn't even try to hide them anymore. A little boy sitting with his parents shouted that he wanted to play like the piano hero, and his mother smiled because she felt the same inspiration. The judges stood too, all three of them. The strict judge pressed his lips together, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes, but he couldn't. He clapped slowly, his gaze fixed on the child who had just changed the entire energy of the room. The female judge had tears openly falling down her cheeks now. She didn't wipe them. She clapped with both hands and nodded repeatedly, whispering, "Amazing. Amazing." The third judge placed his hand on his chest, feeling it race. He knew he had just witnessed something rare, not a performance, but a moment in history. Backstage, crew members peeked out from behind the curtains. Some clapped quietly, some shook their heads in disbelief. One whispered, "This kid. He's going to go far," another said. "This is why we love working here." The sound technicians who missed a few controls earlier now beamed with pride, as if the boy belonged to all of them somehow. As if his success was their success too. The boy sat frozen on the piano bench, staring at the scene unfolding in front of him. He didn't know what to do, what to say, or how to react. His throat tightened. His chest felt full, and his eyes stung. But this time the tears were not from fear or pain. They were from something he had never felt before. Something warm and bright and overwhelming. His vision blurred as the tears filled his eyes, and he lowered his face, hiding behind his hair. But the applause didn't stop. It kept growing, louder, stronger, deeper, like a river of love pouring toward him. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not because he was poor, not because he was different, but because he had something inside him that the world didn't expect. Something beautiful, something powerful, something worth listening to. He didn't hear insults anymore. He didn't hear laughter. He didn't hear doubt. He heard only clapping, clapping that told him he mattered, clapping that told him he belonged, clapping that told him he had touched hearts in a way few people ever do. The host walked toward him, smiling so brightly it lit up the stage even more. He reached out his hand and gently lifted the boy's arm into the air. Like a champion, the hall roared louder, cheering, crying, shouting his name. He didn't even know he had won anything, but he knew he had gained something far more important, a moment he would carry for the rest of his life. And as he stood there, overwhelmed by applause, he realized something simple but powerful. Music had not only saved him, it had introduced him to the world. And the world finally applauded him back. The applause went on, long enough that the boy wasn't even sure what to do with it. His heart felt too big for his small chest. The sound filled his ears, his mind, his whole body. He had never received so much kindness at once, not in his entire life. He blinked fast, trying to clear the tears, but they kept coming. He covered his face with both hands for a moment, overwhelmed by emotions he didn't know how to name. The world had always been loud with judgment, but tonight it was loud with love. When he lowered his hands, he saw the judges still standing, their eyes soft, their smiles real. The female judge gestured gently for him to come forward. He hesitated, unsure if he was allowed to leave the piano. He felt like the instrument had become a friend, a shield, a part of him, but the host nodded and guided him forward. His small footsteps echoed across the stage as he approached the judge's table. His heart thumped against his ribs. But there was no fear this time, only wonder. The strict judge leaned forward first. His voice, usually sharp, came out quiet but steady. He said the boy's performance wasn't simply music, it was a story. A confession, a prayer, something deeper than talent. The boy blinked, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to receiving praise, especially not from someone so important. The judge cleared his throat, trying to maintain his dignity, but failing as emotion cracked through his words. He said he had never been so moved by a performance from someone so young. The female judge took the microphone next. She spoke gently, the way one speaks to a fragile soul. She told him he had a gift, something rare and beautiful, something the world needed to hear. She said he wasn't just a contestant, he was a musician, a true one. Not because of training, but because of heart. Her voice trembled as she thanked him for reminding everyone why music mattered in the first place. The boy looked down shyly, feeling tears gather again. But this time they didn't hurt, they healed. The third judge placed his pen down slowly and said each judge had given him the highest score possible. He announced it in a calm voice. But the audience gasped loudly, some clapped again. Some cheered, some even whistled. The boy's eyes widened as the host raised his arm once more. The judges then said something the boy would remember for the rest of his life. They told him he wasn't just moving to the finals. He was moving forward as someone the world would want to hear again and again. But before the boy could even process their words, someone shouted from the back of the hall, "That's my son." The boy turned sharply. His heart stopped for a second, in the far corner. His mother stood with her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had managed to come after all. She pushed through the crowd, whispering, "Excuse me, excuse me," as she hurried toward the front. She reached the edge of the stage, her chest rising and falling from running. The boy ran to her, forgetting everything else. Forgetting the judges, forgetting the audience, forgetting even the piano. He rushed into her arms, and she hugged him tightly. Trembling with pride, she whispered in his ear, telling him she heard everything, that she saw everything, that he was incredible. She told him he had made her heart feel full for the first time in a long time. He cried into her shoulder, letting out all the years of pain, fear, and loneliness. The audience watched silently, touched by the love between them. After a long moment, they separated, and his mother looked at him with a proud smile that made his heart glow. The host asked if she wanted to say something. She wiped her tears and said softly that her son had always played music to escape a world that didn't treat him kindly. But tonight he showed that even the smallest light could shine bright enough to change people's hearts. The audience applauded again. Not loudly, but gently, like a warm embrace. The boy turned toward them, and something inside him shifted. He no longer felt small. He no longer felt unimportant. He no longer felt invisible. The world had finally seen him. Not as a poor kid, not as a joke, but as someone capable of beauty. Someone capable of reaching hearts without speaking a single word.